Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Dr. Ross Taylor, who we met with his wife Kathy on a leisurely cruise down the Danube last year. We formed a Viking group on board, including Tim, Jane, Ken, and Jill, and we're going to have a chat today about Australia and draw some parallels with the UK. Um, One good thing about you being an Australian and me being a Brit is that I can be rude to you and you can be rude to me, and there's no offence taken.
Well, thank you for having me on for a start, Tony. And I think that's a great intro because, a number of your viewers and listeners would not obviously know that I spend an awful lot of my time in Asia. I've worked for the West Australian government in Indonesia as their commissioner there. So I've got a strong connection with Asia. And I have to say, when Asian people, and really any foreigners for that matter, see Aussies and Brits talking to each other, they're actually they can actually be quite shocked
Mm.
and do not understand. I don't know if I'm allowed to say words like taking the piss, but anyway,
Oh, you said it.
they they really. I've had it a number of times when I've had English mates with me. And afterwards, my driver, an Indonesian driver, would say, "Oh, Mr. Ross," he said, "why were you being so nasty to that man?" And I said, "I wasn't." He said, "No, but you were saying terrible things about him." And it's an interesting point, Tony, because we I think we forget that, don't we? So
Yeah,
between
very much
Aussies
so.
and Brits, it's that mocking, and yet it is such a traditional aspect of the relationship between Australia and Great Britain, which I would argue really even transitions or transcends the relationship that your country has with a pre-Trump America. I think Australia and Great Britain, it's exactly what you said. It's really unique, and it's made up of this sort of mocking, have a go at each other culture. And I think not only is it important, I think it really needs to be preserved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, I don't think you could do it to a Canadian and have the same rapport. I think
Oh
they'd
no, no.
take
Well, our
offence.
son lives. He lives in Canada,
Yeah.
and even if I do that to my son, his Canadian wife will look quite distressed. And I have to explain to her that no, this is an act of love. And she says to
Absolutely.
me, "Well, I've got to say, it's a really strange form of love, you know." And the only thing, Tony, I've got to say though, is when it's an act of love. When it comes to cricket, we draw the line because you bloody Poms
Yeah,
um, deserve to be destroyed.
yeah.
And so,
And you Aussie legitimates deserve the same treatment. But unfortunately, we
well,
don't dish it out often enough. But there you go.
no, 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 we don't. But it's a I think it's an important way to start because there is um, we are now, Australia is a probably one of the most advanced multicultural countries in the world. Um, you know, 50% of our nation now speaks English as a second language. But having said that, this deep relationship at a grassroots level between England and uh, Australian cultures is very much there, and I think it's something to be, as I said, preserved and treasured. It's truly wonderful.
Okay, Ross, let's get on to your role on the board of the University of Western Australia. It's a sort of think tank, is it?
Well, the University of Western Australia is the prestige university of Western Australia. It's certainly in the top three in all of Australia. And I think a couple of years ago, I think they got to a stage where their public policy institute, which does exactly what it says, were looking for some new board members. And I think they got obviously desperate and came and asked me if I would like to join the board. And being serious for a moment, I think the idea was to bring a more international perspective to the work of public policy, which, as you'd appreciate, Tony, public policy can cover almost any subjects
Yeah.
at all that's relevant to the public and the policy that surrounds it. And it has an international context to it as well. So in that role, I get involved in a lot of local issues here in Western Australia, but also there can be public policy issues, for example, that are occurring in Indonesia at the moment. Indonesia's got a new president, very totalitarian focused, very much like a Donald Trump type approach. So that's having a whole range of public policy issues, which, if not controlled carefully, could spill over to Australia, because we're only from the northern part of Australia. It's a 1 hour flight, and you're in the world's one of the world's largest countries, 300 million people, and certainly the world's largest Muslim majority country in the world, and
Yeah.
that's our next door neighbour.
Absolutely. Does the university hope to influence the federal and the state government in certain respects?
Oh, I think that's a good question, and the answer is yes. And when I say influence, I mean that in a very considered, focused way on issues concerning public policy that we do. I'll give you an example. We've just finished a program which was simply called. This sounds very PC, but it was called Women in Politics,
Right.
and it was addressing the issue that we just. And I think Britain's pretty much the same too. Even now, with the rise of feminism, politics in Australia is still, that's in the Parliament. We're still drastically short of women. So our institute has been looking at the reasons behind that. Why is it that good quality people who are female are choosing not to go into politics? I think you and I could give some quick answers to that, but it is an issue, and it does affect how policy is developed in our nation when we're not having a contribution from women who, in my view, quite seriously, I think bring an enormously important, different perspective to all facets of life, including government. So that's the sort of thing we would do, and then we would put up a paper to government to say, look, these are the issues. These are why it's not happening. And it could be something as simple as, child rearing.
Sure.
How can you be a politician when you can't look up at the kids? So
Yeah.
we look at that, and we put that forward as a public policy paper, and then look at ways how we can develop to achieve the end of getting more women into politics. So that's just one example of the sort of thing that we do, and that I think can be very constructive in our society.
Looking at the university situation in general in Australia, how many? What's the percentage of graduates that sort of actually attend university? Is it high? Compared with the people that don't go.
Yeah, we have a very. I don't know the exact percentage. I've done a lot of work with the universities. It is indeed very high, but like a lot of universities, and I think this may be the case in Great Britain, but in some years back, our government started to take the policy of that they would not fund universities as much as they had in the past, and they wanted universities to really become self-funding. And in Australia, what that has led to, and I'm not saying whether this is good or bad thing, under that sort of parameter, we saw a massive increase in the attraction of overseas students who wanted to come here and study. In my view, I think that's been a really wonderful thing because it's introduced layers of different multicultural aspects to university life. But I think, Tony, on the downside, this is probably getting away from your question a little bit, on the downside for our university sector, what we've seen, though, is that because of that move, I suppose you could say it's actually a good thing, but it hasn't really been, is that you've seen universities become more commercially orientated. So their board of directors now are not made up of educationalists, they're made up of hard-nosed business people, because the primary view now is not so much education, it's to make a profit,
Yeah.
which is my world. The question for society is that the framework you want for educational institutes? Because what we're now seeing is if a particular, I'll give you one example. We have one of our third largest universities here in Western Australia, or fourth, is called Notre Dame. It specialises in nursing training. And they're bringing people in from overseas to study as nurses with the opportunity that they can stay on. But what we've seen is that the board have realised they can make better money elsewhere. So they've cut the number of places back dramatically at a time where we need more nurses. So this is where it's starting to work against government. And I think that I think the message is there is that I think there's a balance between governments looking at the university sector and saying how can they work efficiently, but without throwing them to the wolves, if you like, into the real world of purely it's driven by dollars return on investment rather than on education. So here in Australia, we're really going through a little bit of turmoil within the university sector now because what has happened. We're following your course about immigration, and you'll probably get onto that shortly. Is that there are now very strong calls in Australia for us to cut back on immigration, and included in that will be a big reduction in the number of young people who can come and study at our universities. That then creates the problem: where do the universities get their funding from? And there is no answer to that. So there's some quite large challenges now facing our university sector and, by default, our society at large.
The problem we've got here is that there are not enough graduate jobs. They do their 3 years, they come out with a BA or a BSc or whatever, but end up flipping hamburgers because there just aren't the number of jobs that there used to be. And I blame Tony Blair for that, actually, because what he did, he more or less made it semi-compulsory for people to go to university at age 18 to cut down the unemployment. So he moved it on. It had worked for 3 years, but of course, at the end of the 3 years, everything catches up on itself and you don't achieve anything.
No, that's right. And look, we went right down that track in Australia about 8 years ago, where the government of the day decided that it was really, really important to have far more people going to university. And the way they achieved that, they cut back on, we called it TAFE, technical and further education, which is another way of saying trades-related
polytechnic. Polytechnic type thing.
That's right. So we too have ended up with a situation in Australia where we have so many university graduates looking for jobs, but in the meantime, we don't have enough mechanics, we don't have enough builders, we don't have enough carpenters, we don't have enough of this, because we have abused the trades sector of education for 8 or 9 years on this notion that everyone needs to go to university. So when you tell me that story about what is happening in England and in Great Britain at large, we've tended to follow your course, and so now we're going through this desperate catch up of introducing all these polytechnic trades courses. But but the trouble with that is too we're introducing these courses on the basis that we've now got a declining age population. So it's been a mess, and it's a result of poor policy, public policy, and led by poor government.
Yeah. And as far as our students are concerned, they have loans to pay for their fees. So they come out, they graduate, and they've got a whopping great loan to service, and the interest rates are astronomical compared with market interest rates.
That's right.
I would say to a lot of youngsters, think twice before you do something like that.
Yes, and in Australia it's referred to as HECS, where the students quite often leave universities with massive loans,
Yeah.
and on the back of that now they're heading into a housing market like where you are. In order to get a house, dream on,
Yeah.
they need an even bigger loan. So when you put those debts together, even trying to get a loan from a bank for young people is extremely difficult. So, as an older person, I'm 75 now.
You don't
I
look
mean,
it.
it's very easy, but it's very easy for me and you to sit back
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and bag out the young people of today, and they've got lots of faults. My children are in that category, but I do think that there are some really fundamental issues going around education and housing, which, if I was a young person again, I would be quite frankly pretty angry about.
And we've both got the same demographic issues, haven't we, in terms of the baby boomers, of which you are one and I am one, are sort of did well out of housing in terms of capital appreciation on houses, and done fairly well on other things, which I think the next generation and the generation after that is going to find very difficult to equal.
Well, I often relate to people in my own situation because I can remember it well when in 1977, I think it was, my wife and I bought a block of land to the north of Perth, and we built our first family home. And I can remember, Tony, at the time I had quite a good job. I was the state manager of a big air freight company, a big Australian-wide international air freight company. So I was, earning pretty good money. Um, I was earning about 35,000 Australian dollars. What's that? About 17,000 pounds a
Yeah,
year. That doesn't sound much these days, does it?
big money in
Um,
those days.
yeah, but what was interesting was when I looked at my 17,000 pounds a year that I was earning to get the land, build a house, furnish it, and to move in, came to about 18,500 pounds.
Yeah,
So roughly speaking, it costs for us to get a home and land package and move in was the equivalent of 1 year's salary.
yeah. It's
Now,
a lot.
if you translate that today, I don't think I have to do the maths for you and your viewers. I would suggest now where you are, it's probably what, 7 or 8 times that.
Oh,
I
probably getting on for
or
10 in London. Yeah, yeah,
or 10 in London.
yeah.
So anyone in my age group that just says, "Wow, there wasn't much different," they just need to go and do the numbers. In fairness to baby boomers, I think I think we need to acknowledge. I think looking at my children and grandchildren, I think the one thing that we did also do in those years, because of the way we were brought up, we were the children of the war parents, right?
Yes,
The
absolutely.
baby
Yeah,
boomers.
yeah,
And as a result of that, and many of us watching tonight will relate to this. We were not in a position to be indulged by our parents. So if we wanted to go overseas, well, you had 4 jobs,
yeah,
you raised the money, and you did it. And I think what that did do for the baby boomer generation was to generate a very high level of resilience,
yeah,
where today I think we tend to overcompensate and protect our children, combined with much more choices out there as well, has made it a very, very different world from when we were younger.
yeah. It's a total change. Now, totally changing the subject, is the monarchy still relevant in Australia? How is the Republican movement bearing?
Well, I think, bless her heart, Queen Elizabeth really nailed it very well, and King Charles has also said to Australia, look, you're an essential part of the monarchy or of the Commonwealth, but Australia, you need to go at some stage your own way. I have to say that in Australia, there's two issues, Tony. There's one about the monarchy per se, and on that, it's quite divided. It's probably 50-50 still. So there is still a huge respect for the monarchy because it's an institution and institutions around the world in anything are collapsing, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
Australians look, and probably the only institution we can think of, whether it be medical or business or political, the only institution that's still profoundly strong is that we have a monarchy.
Yeah.
And so it's worked extremely well. So in the older demographic, there's still a longing for um, the monarchy. Amongst younger people and more radical people like me, there's a longing for Australia to stand up in our own feet. I think, what Australia has to realise too is that, we are essentially part of Asia. We sit down the bottom end of Asia.
Yeah.
At some stage, as a nation of approaching 30 million people now, we need to be able to stand up uh, on our own feet in the world and say, look, we need to develop our own future, our own dreams, our own aspirations, and to do that, we need to have our head of state being an Australian. But I think that's going to take some time, and I suspect if in years to come, uh, Kate and William end up as the king and queen of the Commonwealth, I wouldn't be surprised to see an increased warming towards the monarchy. So it's interesting. So to answer your question, it's a very mixed bag at the moment, and it is something that governments, quite frankly, are quite happy to let go at present. We have a greater discussion in Australia about our flag, because for those that don't know, the Australian flag consists of the Union Jack up in the top left-hand corner, and then it has the stars of the Southern Cross and the Federation Star. But the primary symbol is that of the Union Jack. Now, I would like to see Australia follow the lead set by Canada and develop our own flag. And there's some debate about that as well. But again, I think having one's own flag, I think provides the foundation for your society upon which to build itself. And if we, and I think we do need in Australia, we need to develop our own flag. But it's hotly debated, Tony. As soon as I talk about this publicly, people will say to me, "Well, my father, he fought in World War One, or
Yeah, yeah,
more,
yeah, yeah,
more
yeah,
likely now,
yeah, yeah.
World War Two. He died under that flag, and we don't want to give it up. But it's a very interesting topic. And just digressing, where I really get myself into trouble amongst older people is that if they say, "Well, what sort of flag should Australia have?" I would like to see, and I'm absolutely dreaming here, I would actually like to see us adopt our First Nations flag in Australia as the Australian national flag. So people say to me, "Oh, so you're very pro Indigenous Aboriginal affairs and all that." And to a degree, I am. But for those that don't know what our Aboriginal flag looks like, it consists of the red of or the ochre colour of our massive land down here,
Yeah.
the black of our Indigenous people, and the big circle yellow sun that in Australia blazes down upon us all day long during summer. It's if you put the politics of that flag to one side, it is a profoundly bold, strong, and very deeply moving flag. It would be a wonderful flag. Do I think it will actually happen? No, I don't, because sadly I don't think you can get the politics out of that, and so I think in Australia we will just bumble along, fighting and squabbling over what sort of flag until we get sufficient leadership in Canberra, our capital, where a prime minister probably is strong enough to get up and say, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's how we'll get our new flag. Because if it's left to the masses, just like the monarchy, we will mumble and squabble about that, and that squabbling continues on until the weekend when, like where you are, the football takes over and we all forget about it.
Couple of tinnies.
More than a couple of tinnies.
Tell me about immigration. You cut that one off, illegal immigration. You cut that one off fairly quickly and fairly effectively, didn't you?
Well, our Prime Minister was Tony Abbott at the time, and we were receiving uh, boatloads of what they refer to as illegal immigrants coming through Indonesia. They weren't Indonesian, mind you. They were using Indonesia as a
Yeah,
transit point,
yeah,
and then coming by boat illegally into Australia. And that presented some problems, though, Tony, for our government, because it's all very well. The slogan that our Prime Minister used was, "We're going to turn back the boats."
I've heard
Um,
that one
and
before.
yeah, well,
Yeah, over here.
and the complexity, though, if you turn back the boats, which are full of people, mostly from the Middle East,
Yeah,
uh, when you say we're going to turn back the boats, that means we're going to turn them in Australia. It means you're going to turn them back to our nearest neighbour, who's really got nothing to do with this, other than that it's being used as a transit point, and dump them on their shores. So that caused some real diplomatic issues. But I have to say, it underlined an issue which I think you're coming to terms with now, that in Australia has prevailed fairly well, and until now has worked well, and that is to say, um, immigration is critically important to Australia. Like, we're an aging population. We don't, we've only got, say, 29 million people, and we're an aging population. The reality that people here don't want to accept is that uh, even now, we don't have enough people to look after us baby boomers in aged care facilities. We don't have enough people to look after our children in daycare centres. We don't have enough carpenters. We don't have enough young people who can pay the taxes to fund our retirement.
yeah,
So for Australia, immigration is absolutely critical. I think the core question is, what sort of immigration do we want? And this is what's led to the rise of the Nigel Farage's shadow here in Australia, Pauline Hanson from the One Nation group, who really is hand in hand with Farage. And their view is a much stricter control over immigration, and it's certainly got a Caucasian feel to it. So really what she's saying is she wants more Caucasian-based people who have our values coming to our country. I don't necessarily agree with that. Well, I don't agree with that. What I do like to see Australia continue to do is to bring in the people from overseas, and I don't care whether they come from Syria, Somalia, from London, but people who can come and contribute to our economy and to our society and embrace our values, uh, and be proudly Australian. If that's the sort of immigration policy we can have, well, then I'm all for it. I think we saw in Germany under the Merkel years, where to just literally open the gates is
stupidity.
really setting your country up for
Yeah,
massive problems that they're now seeing
yeah,
right across the world. So the Australian model modified, I think, is actually a good model. Now, there are people in Australia who would disagree with me because they remind us that the people that are coming by the boats are not generally nasty rich people trying to come to Australia. They are genuinely people fleeing persecution and great harm, and they've got children, and they are just desperate for a better life. And you need to be aware of that. So there's a degree of balance there, I think.
but of course there's a perceived connection with terrorism, and give you an example. Of course, that atrocious incident on Bondi Beach, where all those Jewish people were killed. Do you
Mm.
see that as a problem, terrorism?
Well, it is, and what's really ironical. There was one civilian, and you would have seen him, one man who actually ran from a cafe across and grabbed one of those gunmen
Yeah,
and threw him to the ground. And it was ironic that Australian citizen had his birth in Syria. And it sort of says something. And let me just digress. Anyone who's watching football would have hopefully known that the Socceroos, the Australian team, had a great win over Turkey 2 nights ago. I
No
don't know if
comment.
anyone watched the.
No
Yes,
comment.
we did. And why I tell you that story,
Yeah.
Australians were going crazy that Australia in football would beat someone like Turkey. It was remarkable. And why I tell that story was that the young man who scored that goal came to Australia as a refugee who came out of a refugee camp in Tanzania. So isn't that interesting that those two examples
Yeah.
of Australians
Yeah.
acting wonderfully for our country
Yeah. Yeah.
were,
Yeah.
were, were people from a different birthplace.
Yeah.
So I think that's the core issue. That I think if you just simply say that if you're Caucasians, you've got good values, and if you've got coloured skin or black skin, you haven't. I think that's I think that's fundamentally wrong. There needs to be a different mechanism because certainly in the world I work with, I mix extensively with some of the most wonderful Australians I've ever met, and they don't have white skin.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to be a little bit careful there. But I just get back to the point whereby to open the doors, like England has allowed to do under the ECU
Yeah.
arrangement, you're really talking about a major disruption to your society. And I think that's exactly what you've got there now.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree more. Now, we're getting a bit short on time, and I do know that you wanted to talk about your issues with cancer. And we're actually recording this on the day when Jeremy Clarkson has announced that he's got prostate cancer and is not in a good way. So, when were you aware of your situation?
That was in 1993, and we were living in Singapore. I had a very high-powered job. I actually thought I was incredibly important, dashing off to meetings, jumping on planes, doing contracts. In the first 6 years of my daughter, Tony, of her life, I managed to get to 3 of her birthdays
Yeah.
because the other ones I was just a little bit too busy doing deals around the world. And then in the middle of all that busyness, I found a lump under my arm and was then told from a doctor that that was actually a secondary tumor, which meant that the primary tumor, which was actually a melanoma,
Hmm.
had already got into my bloodstream and spread around my body. And then my prognosis was, at best, they said you'll have to undergo more surgery, radiotherapy, and chemotherapy. We know you've got children aged 9 and 6, and you're living here in Singapore, but your prognosis would be at best probably about 18 months.
Wow.
Um, and then all of a sudden, those missed 3 birthdays, Tony, started to take on some real significance.
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
I think someone once said to me that cancer in a backhanded way can actually be a gift. And I think with myself, it was a calling to really sit down and evaluate. And this sounds a little bit cliched, but really have a look at my life and work out what was really important. And so it sent me on a journey, if you like, to look at my life, starting with like improving my terrible diet, starting to get fit, learning how to manage stress, learning how to say no to people, because I was a person that from childhood grew up with a
Yeah.
quite a significant insecurity complex. I
Yeah.
was never good. I was never good for anything. I just wanted people to like me. So I had, as a bloke, I had some really big issues, Tony, to come to terms with because I thought, and until I address all those issues,
Yeah.
um, I'm certainly heading to meet the doctor's prediction of an 18-month prognosis. And I thought, well, I've really got to do something, but in a holistic sense. I need to, as I say, get all those factors, my fitness, my health,
Yeah.
my stress, my peace of mind, and my attitude to life and my family needs readjustment. So, and I'm sure any males listening and watching this program would understand that when that's put on the table, it's very confronting. But I did it. I did it, and for a whole range of reasons, whether it was God's intervention or the work I did, um, I am now here today, 38 years or something
It's incredible, isn't
later.
it? Yeah.
Um, and I watch my 5-year-old grandsons, who are twins, um, kicking the football outside. And when they say to me, Granddad, can you come and kick the football? I got to tell you, Tony, I've never said no yet.
Hey, on that
Uh,
on that basis, Ross, we've just about run out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, as was on the trip. So, perhaps we'll do another one at some future date. But in the meantime, thank you so much.
it's been a absolute pleasure, Tony, and I'm really glad we didn't talk about some of the stories that we exchanged on that trip. I think some things need to be kept in house. Uh,
Take care, mate. All the best.
Thanks very much indeed, Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.